All right, so here we are with our afternoon panel discussion. One of the great things about the summit gathering is it allows us to the opportunity to showcase and highlight some of the innovative partnerships that are going on out there. Believe it or not, progress is being made. We love being able to highlight creative thinking and the happenings that we know are key to moving the needle forward. So our next panel is going to help us look at these issues at the government level. We have all three levels of government, the federal, state, and local level. As we heard earlier this morning, we know that public support from government is the second largest revenue source supporting early care and learning after, of course, the money that parents are paying, right? We've also been hearing and discussing that more public support is needed for the changes that we see as necessary to bring the best support to young children and families, and so we're going to dive a little bit deeper. So for that panel discussion on government innovation that matters, I'll be moderating a session of 4 guests. We'll also see a video clip from Senator Dan Sullivan. That's actually going to be first. But join me in welcoming Tanja Rucker, the Program Director for Early Childhood Success in the Institute for Youth and Families at the National League of Cities. Alaska State Representative Zach Fields from here in Anchorage. And Mayor Beth Weldon and Library Director Robert Barr from the City and Borough of Juneau, the CBJ. All right, so before we start with the panel, we'll start by showing a video from Senator Dan Sullivan so we can hear what's happening at the national level.
Greetings from Washington, D.C., and welcome to Thread Alaska's Summit on the Economic Impact of Early Care and Learning. And thank you, Stephanie, and thanks to all that are here today for all the great work you're doing on these very important topics. There's nothing more important than the health and the education of our children. And that's why we have fully funded Head Start in the last couple years in terms of the authorizations since I've been here in the United States Senate. And we also reauthorize the CHIP program, known as in Alaska as Denali Kid Care, for 10 years. Didn't make a lot of press, but we thought that was a huge deal, the longest reauthorization in the program's history. That means that people back home do not have to worry about the federal funding, which is enormous for that important child health care program in Alaska. So that's good news, but let me talk a little bit more about what's happening. Further, you all know that lack of access to affordable, quality child care is a huge concern, certainly that I hear from Alaskans as I travel around our great state. Again, that's why the CHIP reauthorization was so important, to relieve some of that concern. But across our country and across our state, many parents are still forced to make tough decisions to justify getting the quality care their children need. So that's why Senator Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota and I introduced the Child Care Workforce and Facilities Act, which will work to bring the cost of child care down and provide more child care centers in areas that need them most, like in our state. In Alaska, there are nearly 40,000 children under the age of 6 with parents in the labor force, but only 23,851 licensed child care slots. That means more than 15,000 kids, or 1 in 4 children in Alaska, are left without access to licensed child care when their parents or parent go to work. The Child Care Workforce and Facilities Act, our bill, Senator Klobuchar and I, works to address part of this problem by providing grant funding to states like Alaska to support the education, training, and retention of the child care workforce. These grants could also help used to build and renovate and expand child care facilities in areas where there are child care facility shortages. Together, we're working in a bipartisan way to solve this issue to ensure that children have access to the child care that they need. But we want to hear from all of you too. So thank you again to Thread Alaska for organizing this important summit. And again, if you have any thoughts, questions, importantly, ideas that come out of this summit or your other activities, please know my door is always open. We want to work with all of you on these important issues. Thanks again.
It's great to see the Senator taking action at the federal level to support more child care in Alaska. Now let's hear from our panel. Here's how we're going to play the game today, is that I will be the disembodied voice from beyond. And we'll start by asking each of our panelists to introduce themselves and your interest and connection to early care and learning for about 5 minutes. And then we'll spend time on a series of questions and discussion. Now, I, of course, have a list of preloaded questions, but to keep this going, we're going to need you. So, white cards, questions, hold them up. Thread staff member comes to the front, right? You guys know how this is played. So, at this time, let me just make it easy, and we'll work from left to right towards Jonathan, and take it away by having Representative Fields introduce himself and tell us about his connection to early care and learning.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks for hosting this event in my district. I represent downtown Anchorage and surrounding neighborhoods. My wife and I have an almost 2-year-old daughter, so I see a lot of these issues through the lens of a young parent. And, you know, my wife and I are relatively lucky, and I just think if raising a kid is hard for us, how much harder is it for someone who works a job that's not flexible, who faces very real economic stresses. You know, in Anchorage, every kid you have is another mortgage in terms of the cost of childcare. So that's my background. Thanks.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Tanja Rucker. I'm delighted to be with you all this afternoon. I bring greetings to you on behalf of the National League of Cities. We're based in Washington, D.C., and I direct the early childhood work for the organization. Our organization represents city governments, so I work with elected officials, mayors, city council members, city managers, and senior staff across the nation, member cities who belong to NLC. And, you know, what brings me to this space and the passion that I have is, you know, the important role that government can play in making sure that every kid gets off to a great start in life and they have what they need to be successful. So at NLC, you know, in addition to the traditional city issues, you know, we all want our streets and roads and, you know, snow removal, all those things when you think about city government. But our goal and my goal is to make sure that your elected officials are also thinking about young kids and babies. And so in my mind, a thriving city is a city where young kids ages birth to age 8 are front and center. So our job every day is to make sure that your elected officials have what they need, they have the best practices, the resources that they need to think about a strong policy and programmatic agenda so that young kids are getting off to a great start in life, and that includes parents and providers as well. So that's what we do every day, and it's great to be with you this afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Beth Weldon. I'm the mayor of Juneau. And thanks for having us up here today, and we hope to get home because we hear there's a windstorm. So anyway, I'm here mainly because Jenny was persistent, and so my interest in childcare started 20 years ago when I had an infant and was looking for childcare. I have 2 sons, and thank goodness my last one just graduated from high school last year. But we have a weird rule in our charter. I was on the assembly, and I had to resign from the assembly in order to run for mayor. So in that process of 3 months that I was off the assembly, a vote came before the assembly of whether to put the child care before the voters, and it failed. So immediately upon becoming mayor, I did a child care task force, and they did really well and came up with some great recommendations. And we are just starting the process of those recommendations, and that's why we're here to share you what we are doing so far. And now Robert will tell you why the director of library is here.
Thank you. So my name is Robert Barr. I'm a librarian by trade, and I just have to say that I am super impressed with the work that Credit Union 1 is doing. That was really, really heartening to hear, and yeah, give them a round. I can't wait to share that story with some people in Juneau who I know are going to be interested in the work that you're doing. So that's awesome. I also felt right at home during the story time that we got. I quickly looked up because in our library catalog and was happy to see that we have 2 copies and are both checked out right now. So that was great. So yeah, I came to be in this space. Well, I have 4 kids. I'm a father of 4. My kids are 4 to 11. But beyond that, when the mayor formed the Childcare Task Force, I was going to be the staff member for that. So I staffed that group, and upon the conclusion of that group, have been helping on the staff side of the table develop recommendation and implementation options that we'll be giving to our assembly at the end of this month, actually. So, yeah.
All right, well, with that, I'm going to head into some individual questions before going to the whole panel. Tonja, can you share with us a little bit more about what you're seeing at the national level with state and local trends related to early childhood investments?
Sure. I think, and I heard a little bit of that this morning about how early childhood is a bipartisan issue. I do see that across the country, regardless of blue, red, purple. Folks really get that the importance of the early years, and I think that speaks to the data and the research that we have. And goodness, you guys had such great data this morning. I was just blown away by learning a lot about your landscape here in Alaska. But I think people are using this data to form these bipartisan coalitions. And so we're seeing city and county and state coalitions coming together, really understanding that the need for a unified voice in early learning. We haven't always been unified. And I think other sectors have presented a more unified voice. And so we're really excited to see the local coalitions coming together, bonding with their state partners to really kind of present a unified case for investment. We also see a trend where we're seeing more 0 to 3. Usually when you think about early childhood, it's 3 and 4-year-olds. You hear a lot about universal pre-K, but we really do see a trending down to prenatal to age 3. And so we're beginning to have a shift in the conversation, thinking about even prenatal and data and what kind of partners that we need at the table to ensure that if we're going down the pipeline a little bit more, do we have the right stakeholders such as health, public health at the table? So those are some of the trends. I'm excited because I know what we're doing at NLC is we're really trying to reframe early childhood as infrastructure. When you think about city government, infrastructure at federal level, state level, local level, it's really something that our elected officials can rally around. And so our framing of the issue of early childhood as infrastructure, we heard a little bit this morning about building brains. And if we're thinking that we're going to have a thriving, vibrant cities across the nation, and if we really are a nation of early learners, then we need to look at early childhood as infrastructure, as key components to any thriving, vibrant city. So I love what we're seeing in the trending of connecting early childhood to transportation, to housing, to sectors that are traditionally not associated with early childhood. So I'm excited about the possibilities of looking across our cities and across our communities and bringing some of those non-traditional partners to the table to expand and broaden our conversations of why early learning is key and fundamental to any city that's thriving and vibrant.
That's great. Let's switch now to the state level. Representative Fields, can you share your ideas about the role of state government in supporting early childhood?
Sure. I think clearly there's a moral imperative that we invest in early childhood healthcare and education. But getting beyond the moral imperative, we also have an economic imperative. When you look at IQ scores, people have been testing IQs for about 100 years. When you look at IQ scores across countries, Western European countries, IQs are growing faster than ours, and it's not really complicated why. Kids have health care, and there's broader provision of early education. So we're missing an opportunity to develop our human capital. Clearly, we just had a debate at the state level about whether we invest in early childhood education at all. The governor thought we shouldn't. Fortunately, the legislature came together in a bipartisan way and overrode his vetoes of early childhood programs. So my view is we can't just do damage control with this governor. We have to do damage control, but that's not enough. We also need to move beyond and think, what kind of infrastructure should we have to develop our human capital in Alaska? And really, it's an opportunity for us to capitalize on what could be a comparative advantage for Alaska and for cities like Anchorage and Juneau. It's actually a really tough time to be a parent in America if you live in a place where there are a lot of jobs like Seattle or Denver or San Francisco. Housing costs are astronomical. It's very hard to afford childcare. It's hard to find quality childcare that's near your home. And even if you have a great job and you find childcare, you're going to spend hours commuting in most large cities. Or alternatively, you can live in a place with affordable housing and shorter commutes where there are no jobs. That's a really tough choice for parents in the lower 48. And here in Alaska, we have an opportunity to have both. We do have high wages. We have good jobs. There's essentially no traffic in any of our cities. So if we capitalize on what could be a comparative advantage of being the best place to raise young kids, that would attract high-earning, innovative professionals to our state, and we would develop our human capital faster than other states. So that, I think, is the economic opportunity, and I just hope that we remember that and capitalize on it, because if we fail to, it would be a missed opportunity.
That's great. Mayor Weldon and Robert, you know, Juneau has great momentum around early childhood, including financial support from the city and borough of Juneau. And in fact, let's face it, Anchorage can't hold a candle to Juneau, at least in this area. And we're really looking forward to that day when we can tell the entirety of the Juneau story. So can you share more about the success that your community is seeing and where you are right now and what's next?
Sure, and this is one of the reasons that Jenny had a hard time pulling us a little bit, because our successfuls are a little vague at the moment, but we're getting there. So first of all, our success is that the Child Care Task Force did a great job. They bonded together really, really well, and they came up with some solid recommendations that 3 of them were short-term and 2 of them were long-term, and we've been able to address the short-term, but Robert's going to talk more about that. Our other success, and I would be remiss in not saying that hats off to Joy Lyon, because we have a strong advocate group in Juneau. So, dogged persistent comes to mind. So our other success is that we have an assembly that believes in this investment, and they're willing to put some money in that, and we'll talk about that in one of our other questions, I'm sure, is the cost of everything. And we also have success that our city staff has basically grabbed these recommendations and run with them and come up with some really great ideas and how we can do that. And again, Robert's going to talk about in this second. But what we would like to see and what we hope to come back next time is say, we have increased capacity. And because of that increased capacity, we have increased quality of our child care. We have increased number of licensed spots. We have an increased number of centers or child care providers that are participating in Learn and Grow. And the ultimate thing that we would like to say is we have an increased number of kids kindergarten ready when they get to kindergarten. And that's probably our ultimate goal right now. So with that, I'll let Robert talk about the details more.
Sure. Yeah, so you know, the big thrust of the task force that the mayor formed to look at this, their number one goal was to increase capacity, and their underlying belief was that as capacity increased, quality would follow. And the biggest piece around that they were interested in focusing on around increasing capacity was on reducing turnover, because we can't really take credit for this. We have a strong interest group in Juneau that wants to see childcare done well, that wants to see childcare professionals compensated fairly, that wants to see people able to enter that marketplace and workforce and thrive and not have to only exist for a couple of years and then slowly decrease their capacity counts because they can't keep staff and then eventually shut down, which we've seen all too often. So the work that we're doing right now and that we'll be bringing back to the Assembly in the coming month or two is really focused around 3 broad areas. The first one, and probably the biggest one, is simply around the money. So, I mean, we all know that at the end of the day, it's a math problem. Parents can't afford to pay much more than they're paying right now, and it is, I found, somewhat surprising when you engage with people who aren't paying attention to this space, to this industry, that even with the amounts that parents pay, when you look at teacher to student ratios, you can't pay a wage that works. You can't pay a wage that keeps people in the job for an appreciable amount of time. So we're looking at a couple of recommendations around money and how we get more money into the system. The second area relates to facility space. In Juneau, we've seen that facilities, the centers that are able to last, again, for an appreciable amount of time in the marketplace, have their facilities fully or nearly fully subsidized by an employer or by the government at a various level. And we see that as a necessary piece of the pie. So we need to figure out, we have a couple of recommendations around how to get more facility space out there in the marketplace for caregivers. And the third one has to do with workforce development, the third area of recommendations. And that's about how we get more people certified and trained to be able to participate in the market.
Well, Robert provided us a great segue there to our next question, which was for the entire panel, which says that Alaska is in a big conversation right now about what we value and where we want to focus our state and local budgets. What's your take on the current fiscal climate and how that really impacts early childhood right now?
I guess I'll start. So at the most basic level, we have a question of, do we match our investment to the revenues that we happen to have at this moment, which is an arbitrary level, or do we match our revenue to the amount of investment to build the state that we want to need, that we all need? And I think we should match our revenue to the needs that we actually have. We need to invest in early childhood education. It's not actually that expensive. It's kind of crazy when you step back and think how much time and energy we all put into fighting for $8 million in early childhood education investment. It's a tiny amount of money. Back when the legislature restructured oil taxes in 2013, there was a last-minute amendment that passed that increased the value of oil tax credits by what is currently about $500 million per year, $500 million. So we are giving up about $500 million more than the oil companies themselves asked for. We wouldn't have a budget crisis if that hadn't happened. We wouldn't have a budget crisis if we addressed that very modest change in oil tax credits, and that's not even eliminating oil tax credits entirely, as some members have proposed. So I think it's worth stepping back and thinking, are we going to match the programs to an arbitrary level of revenue based on the price of oil? I think that would be crazy. Or are we going to match revenue to the needs that we actually have? And why would we not do that? When really, when you look at what Alaskans just said during this most recent budget conversation, when you look at what local governments are investing in around the state, we actually have a pretty broad degree of consensus. We want to invest in basic programs. We want to have an economically vibrant state. And that requires investment in secondary education and higher education, and certainly in early childhood. And stepping it up is actually not that expensive. I think one other comment on this situation of the fiscal debate we just went through, at a really basic level, we've got to decide as a state, do we want to shift a lot of the tax burden onto homeowners, or do we want to have more of the tax burden on oil companies and our trust fund, the permanent fund? And it is very regressive to shift the tax burden onto homeowners. That was a large part of what the governor proposed. The legislature substantially rejected it. We're going to have that question again. And when you look at things like shifting school bond debt cost onto local governments, really all that is a tax shift from oil companies to individual homeowners. And when I think about the city and borough of Juneau doing really great work to expand early childhood education, there's a limit to the extent that local governments can increase taxes on homeowners. We already have pretty high taxes, property taxes in Anchorage. So whenever I think about as a state legislator, are we going to shift that tax burden onto homeowners? I think, well, when we do that, we are not only doing something that's very regressive and that's economically destructive, but we're limiting the ability of our local government partners to take these innovative steps. And let's not do that. We shouldn't be shifting the tax burden in a regressive manner.
Well, I'll take it from the city level. It was interesting because Representative Fields asked me if we went ahead with our stuff, if we waited to see what the state was, and I said, we didn't worry about the state, we just did what we needed to do, which put us on an unsustainable budget, I'll admit, so we have our work to do this fall. But the fiscal climate, as we all know in Alaska, is pretty concerning right now. We just had a vote in Juneau on October 1st with 3 propositions, and the results shows us that people are pretty cautious on how they want our money spent, and they don't really want any increase in taxes right now because they're concerned. So with that being said, I have to read my notes because I won't remember the numbers, but just the things that we did for fiscal year 20. So for the Hearts, and that's where we're doing our workforce, try to increase our workforce. In fiscal year 19, we gave $90,000. In fiscal year 20, we budgeted $180,000. For our Kinder Ready, which is our Juneau School District's kindergarten classes, or preschool classes, excuse me, it went from $140,000 to $300,000 for fiscal year 20. And we started a new program for a revolving loan fund for people doing startups for childcare, and we put $150,000 to that. So that gives us $630,000 that we are now over our budget and we need to find. And we just got a vote, like I said, and people are not really keen on raising property taxes. Juneau has 2 ways to raise revenue, property or sales tax. We have a sales tax. And it's a fine line on how to do that. If we raise taxes in any way, shape, or form, then we're really going against raising a workforce pay. So it doesn't make any sense. So it's a fine line. So we're doing an exercise, a fun-filled exercise this fall for the Assembly, which will take about 4 meetings, is prioritizing our services, and we'll probably have to cut services to make up for this and some other things, but we have to get back to a sustainable budget. So.
Yeah.
I guess one thing I would add to that is, raising local taxes has a direct impact on cost of living. And there was a study that just came out of Raincoast Data. It's an economic analysis outfit, not unlike McDowell, that's in Juneau. Then one of the slides in that presentation was focused on healthcare workers in Juneau and what are the biggest things that keep healthcare workers from either being retained in their job or that ultimately results in turnover in some way for them. And the top thing was cost of living in Juneau, and the second top thing was childcare. So they're both issues that we have to pay a lot of attention to and figure out how to balance that and how to figure out how to have as big an impact on both areas without severely neglecting either one.
And I would just add that, nationally, when you see a lot of cities are really taking that step, as Mayor Weldon noted, of taking a step back and say, like, as a city or community, what do we really value? And then being transparent with your citizens, your residents. A lot of elected officials are doing this kind of participatory budget kind of process where they invite the community in, and they're very transparent about this is like every part of city government that touches young kids' lives, and really being transparent about those services, where the money is going, and then having those very hard conversations about, as a community, what are we going to be known for? And I know that I've traveled quite a bit, and cities and communities have a feel to them. There is a sense of very unique feeling to communities that value kids and families, and you can feel it. And I think when we have that transparency, the efficiency of government, when folks are open about the budget and what services are being provided for kids and families, the buy-in that's needed, and we see that in places where there isn't a strong state infrastructure, we've seen communities be the drivers of policy. Comes to mind recently in the past legislative session in Texas, for decades, it's just been a community by community, cities, individually, and then coming together to drive policy up to the state level. And they had some big wins this past session. And so for those communities that feel like you're in these kind of barren deserts at the state level, or you may not have the supports that you need. We really do see that as cities and communities are taking this kind of what do we value and seeing that as a driver for growth and development. Communities that value kids and families, you see it in their budgets, you see it in their policies, you see it in their mission statements, and those are drivers for change, and people want to live in those places. And so we see a number of elected officials that are making the argument. It does take time, but when you're transparent, you open the process up, and you have the residents weigh in on what do we value and what do we want to invest in. We do see that there is a drive for more investment in young kids and families because of the data and the research that we have that's really driving long-term investments and what a return on investment that really is.
So one of the things that I really love is I love those aha moments, you know, that moment where you see that spark in people's eyes. And I think that's certainly something that the educators in the room can identify with, is when you're working with a kid and you just see them and they get it. I think it's probably also something that the consultants in the room get because they work with clients and all of a sudden they get those aha moments. So when this is for the panel, what are you learning from your work connected to early childhood that are driving those aha moments? What are the things in the last year or so that have surprised you, that have challenged you, or that you've found inspiring or hopeful that just gave you that moment of discovery?
I'll go first. So what surprised me, like I said, I have 2 sons, and 20 years ago, when I went out to find childcare, an infant, sorry, Juneau's cost more than anywhere all the time, I swear. It was cost $1,000 to put an infant in childcare. 20 years later, that's about the same price. It's like, what happened? I was shocked when we went around and talked to people and found that that's true. So no wonder they're not making money. And so I was shocked when I was finding out child cares were failing because of money. It was shocking to me. I mean, you guys are probably going, of course, you idiot. But when you're away from it, you don't realize that your life is, you just have this plateau and you guys aren't increasing. And that was just shocking to me. So again, thanks to all our advocates that pointed that out to me very well, because it was just surprising. And so that was probably the most surprising thing to me. The challenging thing for me as a public official will be trying to find that balance between continuing to give money to help with that problem, but still being able to balance our budget. So the hopeful that I am is coming to hear like this and seeing the dedication of child care providers, and still knowing that you're doing this even though you're not making a lot of money, and the survey was really encouraging, so that's pretty hopeful for me. And again, you guys have a strong advocate group, so that's pretty hopeful to me. So I hope that we can keep moving together and get more people to understand the importance of early childhood learning. I was lucky because I came from a family of teachers, so I was in pre-K back when it probably wasn't much of a thing, and both of my sons were in preschool, and I hope that others can have that too. Oh, I'll go back to one other challenging thing. The one other challenging thing that we'll all have to work on is to make sure the very, very low-income kids can get to these programs.
I'll go next. So one thing that constantly surprises me is that people don't understand the connections between Medicaid and a broad range of healthcare services, certainly that affect young kids. Medicaid pays for 1 and 2 births, just to give you an example in Alaska, and that's true nationally as well. So, you know, the number one reduction that the governor proposed, in addition to the University of Alaska, was Medicaid. And in the media, you often see Medicaid described as healthcare for poor people. Well, 215,000 Alaskans have health insurance through Medicaid, so I think to call it healthcare for poor people is totally misleading, but also obscures how important it is for kids. So, number one, I think it's important for all of us to educate people about how important Medicaid is, including for the work that many of you do. But we should also be thinking about, okay, in addition to sustaining Medicaid, which is really important, we also need to think about leveraging Medicaid to improve early childhood care. One example, and the mayor just mentioned it, every expecting mom and new family in Alaska should have the ability to have home health visits to improve care coordination, and make sure that their kids are taking full advantage of healthcare resources. We don't have that. There are some pilot programs. The All-Alaska Pediatric Partnership does a great job with some of those. But unfortunately, state budget cuts for public health nursing have meant that in a lot of cases, actually fewer families have access to that very basic care. So in my mind, the state should absolutely be pursuing a state plan amendment to support care coordination, because every family should have access to those services. That would be one very clear-cut way that we could leverage additional federal dollars to improve care for kids.
So the story that surprised me the most as I've been working in this area is kind of historical. So I learned in one of our task force meetings that in World War II, there was a federal program that federally subsidized, which many of you know, right? I see lots of nodding heads, that subsidized childcare in every state except New Mexico, I believe it was. I don't know why not New Mexico, but anyway. And that went away when World War II finished, not because the value wasn't there, but because of it had actually passed Congress to continue it, but President Nixon at the time vetoed that. But it didn't go completely away. There's one United States department, government branch that still provides child care in a fairly substantial subsidized way for their employees. That's the Department of Defense. And I didn't know any of this before working in this arena. And it just goes to show that, that there's a major section of our government at the federal level that still sees the value in helping their employees care for their children when they're ages 0 to 5, because it goes a long way towards helping them with retention and turnover in their staff. It just makes sense. I guess the other thing I would point out, which has already been pointed out today, is that in Alaska, we spend anywhere, it depends on what community you look at, but anywhere from, I think it's about $13,000 to about $25,000 per year of public money on children when they're in the K-12 school system. We don't spend anywhere close to that in public money for the 0 to 5 age children, and it doesn't particularly stand to reason. There's a lot of things that you can say about a lot of arguments that you can make about how that doesn't quite work in our economy.
For me, I think one of the things that surprised me is that, we have a lot of champions out there for early learning, but I'm always struck by how this doesn't really translate into policy and practice locally. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to help elected officials, local leaders, to think about big P and little p, like the policies that are on the books. What can we do to make sure that regardless of who's in office, that the community has policies and practices on the books that really support kids and families, and certainly just how cities do business. There's a lot of things that much can be done that can really promote young kids and be family friendly. So I think it's surprising, but I think it's an opportunity for us to really shift into some hardcore governance and models that can really sustain the winds of political pressures or whoever is in office. I do think too, I'm really excited about the number of new leaders, folks that are running for office. It's an exciting time. We see a whole new crop of mayors and council members that are running for different reasons. But one of the challenges, and we've already begun to pick up on this a little bit, is that when we are in these communities, there's a tug of war, there's a pull between the old and the new. And I think we need to strike a really balance of there's a lot of things that we can learn from folks that have been in government for a long time, and at the same time, there's new ideas and fresh ideas with newly elected officials. So I think there's a great opportunity to really kind of blend the old and the new. And so I think in terms of policy, there's some really exciting opportunities that are in front of us for new policies and legislations at the local level.
Great. Well, a reminder to the audience that if you have your questions, to hold them up in the air, and a staff member will bring them up front. Let me ask, where are you guys feeling success right now related to your position and the issues related to quality early childhood education? Where are the ripe fruit at the moment?
I'll start off with a small success, and this is a small one, but we recently at the City and Borough of Juneau implemented an infants in the workplace policy. which has been really fun for me. I haven't had the opportunity to bring an infant in the workplace, but one of my employees has, and it's a little step, but it helps with those first couple of months of care. It helps with bonding, and it doesn't work in all of our positions, right? Our transit drivers probably wouldn't work so well for them, but it does work okay for a librarian. So it's a little thing, but it's a step in the right direction.
I would say just that at the local level, elected officials really taking seriously their commitment to being responsible, for their residents. There's a disconnect from Washington for sure, and at the state level, sometimes there's a disconnect. But at the local level, elected officials really do have a sense of, we need to find solutions, and I want to be responsible to my constituents. And so I do see this kind of open dialogue and openness to learn and hear in real time from residents. So I'm just excited about the partnerships that we're seeing locally and how stakeholders are coming together, because nobody's coming. I think that's what people are saying, as Washington works itself out, we have to figure things out. So I think the innovation and having local communities being those labs of innovation and testing out ideas and partnerships and piloting different types of programs is really the place where I'm excited to see local level innovation.
Well, since we were successful in reversing the governor's vetoes of early childhood education, I think with that momentum now is a good time to articulate where we should go next. What if we were going to do something positive and get beyond damage control? So I know Representative Drummond is here. There were some other legislators here. My Senator Tom Begich has a bill on pre-K. Certainly, we should have universal pre-K. Certainly, we should have access to home visitation for new parents. So members of the Children's Caucus, I'm one of those, are working on a package of bills so that we could see, hey, what if we were going to make Alaska the best place to raise a family? What would that look like in terms of state policy? So we aren't going to be able to pass all those bills in the last half of this session, but I think we need to put the concept out there and give people something to strive for.
And I would say that the success that I've seen is the collaboration of all the different groups, especially in our town, coming together and saying this is a problem. We have the chamber involved, we have the tribe involved, we have the early childhood educators, we have the school district involved, and all of us are saying we need to do something about this. And like I said, we're just thankful that the Assembly is at this point agreeable and we're moving forward. Some of us might have to drug a little bit more than others, but we're moving forward. So the collaboration is a pretty cool thing to see. And I don't know any entity in Juneau anywhere that's going, well, that's a stupid idea, you guys shouldn't do that. Everybody is, yes, why didn't we think of this before?
All right. Well, so I asked for questions, and I got a couple, and then I got a couple more, and now I have more questions than we actually have time for, which is a great thing. So I'm actually going to try and collapse a couple of these together and ask a directed question of each of the members. So this is for our team from Juneau. I have a lovely message here that is actually from the Anchorage Assembly Chair that says, Anchorage hopes to join you in these efforts. Thank you. Of the recommendations from the Childcare Task Force, they hope to join us in the recommendations based upon the Childcare Task Force. First of all, how close was the last vote in Juneau? And this is also for the mayor and Robert, is what suggestions do you have to give to mayors of other cities, municipalities and boroughs in Alaska? So 2 questions there. How close was it? And what recommendations do you have for other municipalities about to embark on similar processes?
Okay, Joy might have to help me with this one, but I think it didn't. I think this is the question you're asking. The question to go to the ballot about childcare, I believe, was a 5-4 split. No, there was less than this. I'm sorry. 4-3 and 4-4. Robert corrected me because, like I said, 2 of us were running for mayor, so we were off at that time. So so it was close. So collaboration is the key to getting everybody going together. So, and I'm sorry, you have to give me the second part.
The second part is recommendations for other leaders of other municipalities.
Get your business community involved. That'd be my recommendation. They're the ones feeling it the most. When we did our poll, we had 550 people say that because of lack of childcare, they couldn't get to work. Or couldn't be in the workforce. And that's huge to your business community. I'm sure everybody's dealing with it in Alaska, because I know it's down in the 48. Your turnover in your workforce is tremendous. I'm a working mayor. I also have a business. And so the continually workforce changeover costs you more money than some of the stuff you would implement for childcare. So get your business community involved would be my recommendation.
And I think I was wrong. I don't think it was 4-3. I think it was 4-2. But the gist of that is that there are more people that voted for it than voted against it, but it needed 5 votes. And there weren't enough people on the assembly at the time to get 5 votes. And the only thing I would add is the faith community, too, has been a big partner and is interested in being a big partner with us. And we're seeing that, and our assembly will see that in the recommendations that come forward. And for them, they have the potential to be a big partner from a facility and space perspective. And it doesn't look like there's much that we have to do from a local funding perspective to get them over the hump to be able to provide that space to a potential childcare provider.
So for anyone out there who's not fully into this issue yet, please consider approaching Thread about a program called Ready Nation. Ready Nation, Brian Holst from Juneau and I went a couple years ago. They have 5 divisions. One is mission readiness, which is the military. Then there's a faith component, there's a business component, there's an athletic component, and I'm going to forget the other one. But those are the big 5. What? Workforce development. Law enforcement. So crime. Those are the big 5 communities that they go after to kind of make change, so we can talk about that. Tanja, can you talk more about the role of public health in early childhood successes? And can you talk a little bit about creative ways you've seen communities support early childhood?
Yeah, you would think the health community would be like front and center, but it really hasn't. I think that's short-sightedness on some of the early childhood coalitions that we've worked with down through the years. But as we're moving down the pipeline, prenatal to age 3, there is just an urgency of really bringing, whether it's insurance companies, hospitals, doctors, pediatricians, more front and center to have a voice and to really help drive what the local agenda is. And so I think communities are moving in that direction. There hasn't been a lot of nationwide successes, but I think in places where there's the hospitals and the medical community is part of the initial strategic planning, there's greater buy-in from that community. And I think there's also our partners from Medicaid at the state level and Medicare, just having those people as part of your thought partners and helping you formulate what's locally your priorities is certainly important. So there's been challenges, I think, across the nation in terms of getting the right outreach to those folks and making sure, because most communities have already moved pretty far down the road of their strategic planning, and it's almost like, well, it's an afterthought. And so now having to backtrack a little bit and engage with the medical community in a more intentional way, but we do see that happening, and there's a lot of energy now around the infant toddler space. A lot of elected officials, a lot of funders, foundations are really interested in going down the pipeline. So we see that there's more intentionality around our health partners. I think, where we see the greatest success is when early childhood is not identified with one particular leader, and that kind of gets to what you were just saying. It has to be buy-in from all sectors, and so it's great to have a champion. If it's your mayor or your council member, you need that buy-in and using the bully pulpit to bring folks together. City Hall can be a great convener, but I don't think you want it to be identified with just one particular person, one particular party. So those communities where there's just a wide table where everyone's invited, and it's a community-driven, parent-driven. I think we often leave parents out of this, and neighborhood voices, neighborhood champions. And so when it's really from the community up, that's where we have the greatest success and buy-in, and there's great sustainability over time, regardless of who's in office.
Okay, thank you. Representative Fields, I've got a twofer for you. First of all, what is your position on HB 28, the Living Wage Act? And 2, how confident are we that we won't have to fight over the $8 million again in a couple of months, should we ask for 15?
I don't know, Jonathan. Do you trust the governor? Yeah, I think Representative Tarr may still be here, and I believe that bill number, I haven't memorized every HB number, believe it or not. I believe that's her bill to establish a $15 minimum wage. We held one hearing on it to look at, is there a relationship between raising wages and reducing job creation? And basically, when you look around the country, a lot of local governments have raised the wage to $15, and there's no evidence that it has a negative impact on job creation. I would certainly support looking at raising wages, especially for the early childhood workforce. That bill has not advanced to a point where we would see if it would have broader support in the legislature. And I should add, by the way, I think half the Anchorage Assembly is here, the mayor's office is represented, and you know, what we're talking about really is innovative actions to move forward and make our cities better places to live. And the work that's gone on at the local government in Anchorage over the last 4 years is pretty spectacular. So I just want to commend our local government partners.
Okay, so I've got the 5-minute signal. I'm going to try to move this quickly because we are a little bit behind. Someone asked a question about where do we find info and numbers about oil tax credits. Okay, Budget Geek right here, OMB, the Office of Management and Budget website, Department of Revenue, Revenue Sources book. They produce one in the fall and the spring, is a great place to start for those. Can the Juneau folks explain the Juneau Hearts Initiative, the rates and who it impacts? Go ahead.
I mean, you really want to ask Joy this question because she runs the thing. But the Hearts program is essentially targeted at employees that work full-time in licensed childcare centers, and it provides them with it's annual right now, right? Annual stipends that go directly to them as long as they continue to work in a childcare center and complete training requirements. So it's essentially a wage subsidy. It's essentially extra money in their pockets that they can look forward to at the end of the year as they complete their training requirements. And as the mayor said, we doubled the amount that we're spending on that in FY20 with the hope of awarding more of those awards and just continuing to kind of chip away at the retention and turnover challenges that centers have.
All right. I don't know who asked that question, but Joy, would you stand up just so everyone can put... For those who don't know, Joy Lyons from Juneau, long-term and much valued champion for kids here in Alaska. Okay, 2 questions left. Some providers have said that high insurance costs either drive up their expenses or don't allow them financially to provide care to specific age ranges. Are you aware of any methods used to reduce the costs of insurance for child care providers? Anyone willing to field that? Have any ideas there?
No idea. It's a good thing, though. We should check into it. But that might be a little bit tougher. But yeah, I'm looking around. I don't think any of us have looked at that. So.
All right, last question, and kudos to the panel and the audience for hanging in there. How do we get people to view childcare as a public issue, an infrastructure issue, or a public good versus the job of parents who just need to figure it out and bear the full cost?
You have to tell the stories that you heard today, and you have to tell them over and over again, and people need to hear it over and over again before it sinks in. One time's not enough.
And that's where we can thank Joy Lyon and her group with Best Starts, because they just kept hammering the assembly and hammering the assembly and hammering the assembly and then hammering it again. And finally, I think we got it. And then you need to get out in your public as an elected official and talk to your young folks and see what's going on. I mean, it was surprising that we had 2 groups when I campaigned. One, we don't have enough money for childcare, and the other group was, we can pay whatever you want us to pay, we just can't find a slot. And it was very interesting to see that there was 2 very different groups, and they settled into one of those groups, so that was interesting. But yeah.
think it's pretty much the same. I think you need diverse champions, folks from different sectors. You mentioned the folks from law enforcement, parent voices, as well as your elected officials. But I can't say enough that you need to keep saying the same thing. I do agree that I think as a community, you need to land on your data points. Like you guys had so much great data this morning, and I was thinking like, okay, what are the 5? And if everybody's saying the same 5 over and over again, I think you do penetrate and you make the case. And I tell you, when I go to council members meetings, and quick story, I just first week at NLC, and I'm down in Mississippi, and at a council meeting, and driving, and really you can't get on the lot. People are just standing. I'm like, did they know I was coming? My head kind of got big because I thought it was for me. But it was the casinos, and they had some things on the table for the city, and they know how to get their folks out. But early childhood folks, we need to be persistent. We need to be at every council meeting. We need to have our talking points, and you need different people giving the message over and over.
I agree with that. The only thing I would add is hold your elected officials accountable. If you have an elected official who's only giving you lip service, replace them with someone who will put their money where their mouth is.
Nice. And on that strong note, thank the panel with me. Thank you, panel. Beth has something to add.
Yeah, just one quickly. Our child care committee's recommendations are on our website, juneau.org, and our deep dive is very draft, but if you emailed me at beth.weldon@juneau.org, my deputy mayor is going to, or my deputy city manager is going to kill me, but I would share it with you. So email me and I'll share you our, but remember it's draft.